Picture this. It's 1253 in Karakoram, the heart of the Mongol Empire. Among the crowds of monks and merchants, Mongol intelligence officers have just discovered something terrifying. No 400 elite assassins, the most feared killers of the medieval world, have infiltrated the city. Their target? Mongol Khan himself. Each assassin carries a curved blade dipped in neurotoxin, so deadly that a single scratch means an agonizing death. This is the moment that sparked one of history's most brutal campaigns of annihilation. For 160 years, the Order of Assassins had controlled the Middle East through terror. Operating from their mountain fortress of Alamat, they believed themselves untouchable. They were wrong. Mongol Khan didn't rage or panic. He sat on his throne and watched as guards dragged the captured infiltrators before him, tossing their poisoned daggers at his feet. The clatter of metal on stone marked the end of an era. For over a century and a half, the assassins had paralyzed every sultan and crusader king through targeted killings. They thought the Mongols were just another group of nomadic horsemen who would tire of climbing mountains and go home. They fatally underestimated Mongol memory. Mengi turned to his brother Hulagu and gave him an order that bypassed all traditional diplomacy. March west with 1/5 of the empire's entire military strength. This wasn't a mission to expand borders. It was a mission to erase a name from history. Hulagu moved with terrifying precision. He didn't just mount his horse and charge. He transformed the landscape itself. Thousands of Chinese engineers began constructing a road stretching from the Mongolian steppes to the peaks of Persia. They hammered bridges over rivers that had never been crossed by armies. They leveled mountain passes with iron picks and gunpowder, creating a highway for the heaviest siege weapons the medieval world had ever seen. While the assassins sharpened their knives in their towers, the Mongols stockpiled grain every few miles across thousands of leagues. Hulagu's officials seized every blade of grass and bushel of wheat along the route, ensuring his 150,000 soldiers would never need to stop and forage. The Mongol war machine was no longer a swarm of horsemen. It had become a slow-grinding hydraulic press. In the mountain fortresses of Kurdistan, the assassins watched the horizon. They expected a fast cavalry raid they could wait out behind thick stone walls. Instead, they saw a literal forest of wood and iron moving toward them. The Mongols brought massive trebuchets, disassembled and carried on thousands of camels. These machines could hurl boulders weighing hundreds of pounds over distances. The assassin archers couldn't even reach to understand why the assassins felt safe as the world's largest army marched toward them. You need to look at where they lived. In the jagged ridges of the Elborz Mountains in northern Persia sits a peak called Alamat, meaning eagle's nest. It's a massive slab of rock rising vertically from the valley, accessible only by a single narrow path that forces climbers to expose their backs to defenders above. In 1090, a man named Hasan I-Sabbah didn't capture this fortress through siege. He infiltrated it, converted the garrison to his radical branch of Ismaili Islam, and simply handed the previous owner a payment for a castle he'd already stolen. From that moment, Alamat became the brain of a shadow state that haunted the nightmares of the medieval world. Hasan I-Sabbah was a master of psychological warfare. He knew his small community could never win pitched battles against massive empires. Instead, he weaponized the human mind. He transformed the concept of martyrdom into a political scalpel. His followers, the Fide, were trained from youth in languages, disguise, and patience. A Fide might spend 3 years living as a devout monk in a rival sultan's mosque, gaining trust, eating at his table, sleeping at his door. Then, with a single whispered command from a lemmet, that monk would draw a blade and end a dynasty in the middle of Friday prayers. This was the old man of the mountain system. No king is powerful if he cannot trust his own shadow. Legend speaks of secret gardens and hashish-induced visions used to brainwash these killers. But historical reality was far more disciplined. The library at Alamat was one of the greatest centers of learning in the world, filled with texts on astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. The men there weren't drugged fanatics. They were highly educated operatives who believed their leader was God's infallible messenger. This absolute devotion created a terrifying tactical advantage. The Order's power grew until they controlled a network of over 50 fortresses stretching from Afghanistan to the Mediterranean. One famous story tells of a Seljuk sultan who sent an army to destroy Alamat. He woke one morning to find a dagger pinned into the ground beside his bed, with a note: "What is placed in hard ground can also be placed in your soft breast." The Sultan immediately retreated. For 166 years, this strategy was flawless. The assassins had survived the Crusades, outlasted Saladin, and watched dozens of empires crumble around them. Their fortresses had water systems and granaries carved into mountain stone capable of withstanding 10-year sieges. They viewed the coming Mongol tide through this lens of historical arrogance. The Mongol arrival changed everything. When Hulagu's scouts first entered the valleys below Alamat, they didn't see a target needing charm or intimidation. They saw a problem of physics. The Mongols perfected the art of the total hunt. Every year, they practiced the Nurj, a massive hunting circle stretching for miles, driving every creature toward a central killing zone. To the Mongols, the assassins were just difficult prey that had run into a high hole, while the assassins waited to threaten an ambassador or kill a general. The Mongols simply began stripping the land bare. They methodically cleared surrounding villages, removing the assassins' intelligence networks and food supplies. They didn't care about daggers in the night because their camps used concentric security that made infiltration impossible for anyone who didn't look, speak, smell like a man of the steppes, the psychological weapons that had paralyzed the Islamic world for generations became useless. You cannot intimidate a machine that only cares about logistics and stone-crushing power. Hulagu spent nearly 3 years in obsessive preparation, commanded that every 10 men across the entire Mongol Empire provide 2 for his expedition, creating a force of over 150,000 seasoned warriors. But soldiers were just the beginning. He drafted 1,000 households of Chinese engineers who held the secrets of mechanical destruction. These masters of early gunpowder weapons and massive trebuchets could dismantle stone walls with a surgeon's precision, instead of charging blindly toward the mountains. Hulagu transformed Central Asia into a conveyor belt of death. His engineering corps built permanent wooden bridges over wide rivers capable of supporting thousands of heavy supply wagons. They carved wide roads through narrow mountain passes that had previously only seen goats. This was Mongol siege warfare on a continental scale. As the army moved, it consumed everything around it. Administrators established sophisticated networks of supply depots and grain silos every few miles along the march. Thousands of camels carried disassembled siege engines. The Mongols weren't just bringing men, they were bringing a city of iron. Every night, the Mongol camp was laid out in precise geometric grids, protected by sharpened stakes and constant patrols. Assassins watching from high ridges found no gaps in Mongol armor, no unguarded generals to snatch, no chaotic supply lines to raid. The old man of the mountain was watching a tidal wave of metal slowly rise toward his door. By the time the main Mongol army reached the borders of the assassin state in 1256, the war was already half won. The Mongols had neutralized the terrain, secured their food, brought Earth's finest military technology to the mountain base. The first test came at outlying fortresses in the Kurdistan region. These were the shield walls of the assassin state, designed to bleed invaders dry before they could reach Alamat. The defenders looked down from their ramparts and saw something unprecedented. The Mongols didn't wait for formal surrender or try scaling walls with ladders. They began rhythmic industrial bombardment. Chinese engineers assembled their machines with practiced speed, and soon boulders the size of barrels rained down on the parapets. Mongol archers used specialized heavy bows that outranged assassin defenses, creating a no-man's land where any defender showing his head was instantly met with high-velocity arrows. This wasn't a battle of bravery, it was a battle of suppression. One by one, outer towers began cracking and groaning. Stone that had stood for generations against the best Islamic armies was being turned into gravel by persistent mechanical thuds of Mongol trebuchets. Hulagu sat in his command tent surrounded by astronomers and scholars, reading progress reports. He wasn't a man of the sword as much as a man of the ledger, tracked every stone thrown and every bushel consumed. When the fortress of Tun finally had its walls collapse, creating a ramp of rubble, Mongol engineers moved in with fire arrows and early grenades, clearing the breach with explosive heat. The fall of Tun wasn't a battle, it was an execution. Hulagu had issued specific instructions. For treating those who resisted, he wanted the world to understand the cost of defiance. As Mongol soldiers flooded through the breach, they systematically hunted every armed man. The Persian historian Juvayni, who accompanied the army, noted the terrifying efficiency of the slaughter. The Mongols didn't kill in a frenzy. They did it with quiet, administrative coldness. This massacre served a vital purpose in Mongol siege warfare. It was a message sent on the wind to every other fortress in the region. Within weeks, governors of nearby strongholds began receiving messengers from the Mongol camp carrying simple, blunt facts. Look at what happened to Tun. Your walls are stone, but our stones are heavier. Your water will run dry. Your gates will break. Surrender now, and you might live to see the next moon. Resist, and you become the dust we walk on. The effect was devastating. The aura of invincibility that had protected the assassins for 166 years evaporated. Across the plateau, command structures began to fray. Local commanders who had once sworn to die for their imam found themselves staring at the horizon, waiting for dust clouds, signaling their own annihilation. While Mongol siege engines turned Kurdistan fortresses into gravel, a different collapse was occurring inside Alamet's walls. In late 1255, Grand Master Ayla ad-Din Muhammad III was found murdered. His death left the sect in the hands of his eldest son, Rukin ad-Din Kursha. History often places the wrong person in the right place at the worst time. Kursha was young, inexperienced, and lacked the fanatical conviction that made his ancestors terrifying. He inherited a kingdom of shadows just as the sun of the Mongol Empire began burning those shadows away. He was more comfortable with abstract philosophical debates than the grim reality of logistics and blood. Juvayni described him as like a snake caught in a basket, twisting with every new report of Mongol progress, frantically searching for an opening that the heavy Mongol lid had already sealed. Hulagu recognized this weakness from miles away. He didn't just want to kill Kursha. He wanted to use him. The Mongol leader began a campaign of psychological warfare as effective as his catapults. He sent carefully calibrated letters to Alamat. He didn't use a tyrant's language, spoke as a pragmatist, promising that if Kursha descended from his mountain, destroyed his own fortresses, and surrendered, he would be treated with honor befitting a high-ranking noble. If he refused, Hulagu promised that not even Alamet's stones would remain to mark where the order once stood. Within the assassins' council chambers, a bitter divide erupted. Hardline commanders argued for scorched earth defense. They believed the mountains would eventually break Mongol spirit. But rival advisors, seeing the 150,000-man army encircling them, whispered of survival. Kursha, caught between these worlds, began a desperate game of diplomatic stalling. He sent messengers offering partial surrenders, promising to destroy minor castles while keeping great ones intact. Hulagu had no patience for games. Each time a messenger arrived with excuses, the Mongol army simply moved 5 more miles closer, to the heart of the Elburz. By late 1256, stalling tactics had run out. Hulagu issued a final ultimatum, giving Kursha 3 days to descend and surrender. To emphasize the point, Mongol trebuchets began test bombardment. Heavy stones didn't hit the walls, they sailed over them, smashing into living quarters and ornate gardens. The message was clear: the Mongols could destroy the imam whenever they chose. On November 19, 1256, the gates of Maimandis creaked open. Rushin ad-Din Kursha, the last true leader of the assassins, walked out into cold mountain air to meet his fate. He didn't come as a warrior, but as a supplicant. When Kursha descended to submit to Hulagu Khan, he brought the keys to the entire assassin state. Hulagu forced the young imam to send messengers commanding remaining fortresses to dismantle their walls and surrender. Complied. Spirits broken by seeing their leader in Mongol custody. But when the Mongol vanguard reached Alamat's base, they found the gates barred. The garrison at the Eagle's Nest looked down from their 200-meter limestone perch and chose to ignore their captive imam's commands. To these veteran warriors, Kershaw was speaking under duress, and Alamat's sanctity was more important than their master's survival. They believed the fortress was physically impossible to take. They were about to discover that the Mongols viewed impossible as merely a problem of engineering. The siege of Alamat began in late 1256 under a sky-threatening, brutal Persian winter. The geography was a nightmare for any traditional army. The fortress sat on a narrow ridge with sheer drops on almost every side. The only path up was a zigzagging trail that could be defended by a handful of men with rocks and boiling oil. Instead of direct assault, Hulagu initiated a display of Mongol siege warfare bordering on the surreal. He ordered Chinese engineers to haul massive trebuchets up adjacent ridges on thousands of laborers' backs. They built a network of high-altitude firing platforms, allowing them to shoot directly across the chasm at fortress walls, the air around Alamat filled with sounds the mountains had never heard. The rhythmic, mechanical thud of giant crossbows. Massive mounted weapons fired heavy bolts over vast distances with terrifying accuracy. Mongol archers positioned on surrounding peaks maintained constant arrow rain that pinned defenders behind battlements. While archers provided cover, heavy trebuchets began their work, hurling boulders weighing over 100 pounds across mountain air, smashing into Alamat's stone towers with the force of modern artillery. Defenders, who had boasted of their 10-year food supply, watched as magnificent masonry was slowly hammered into dust. Nature itself tried to intervene. Thick clouds descended on peaks, and heavy snow began falling, turning narrow paths into lethal ice slides. In any other campaign, this would signal invaders to retreat to lower ground. But the Mongols were born in the world's harshest winters. They thrived in cold. Hulagu's troops didn't move an inch. Engineers continued calibrating machines through fog and sleet, the site of the Mongol camp. Unshaken by blizzard and continuing work with machine-like indifference, destroyed the garrison's last remnants of morale. They realized they weren't fighting men. They were fighting a harnessed force of nature bound by iron discipline. The final blow wasn't a grand charge, but the realization of total isolation. The Mongols had systematically intercepted every attempt to send assassins out. The gates, the legendary killers, who for centuries had moved like ghosts through enemy lines, found themselves trapped in a stone cage. On December 15th, 1256, after days of intense bombardment breaching outer defenses, Alamat's garrison finally realized their Eagle's Nest had become a tomb. They sent word to Hulagu that they would surrender, provided their lives were spared. When Mongol soldiers finally ascended that narrow path and walked through Alamat's gates, the world of the assassins effectively ended. For 166 years, this rock had been the center of a shadow empire dictating the Middle East's fate. It was just a collection of cold stone, buildings filled with starving men, and a vast library of secret knowledge. Hulagu walked the ramparts, himself marveling at the sophistication of water systems and storehouses. He recognized the genius of architects who built this place, even as he prepared to dismantle their legacy forever. Hulagu understood that a living, cooperative leader was far more valuable than a dead martyr. As Alamat's gates were being dismantled, he didn't cast Kershaw into a dark dungeon. Instead, he welcomed the young imam into the Mongol camp with hospitality bordering on the surreal. Kershaw was given a seat of honor at the Khan's table, draped in fine Mongol silks and treated as a distinguished guest. This wasn't kindness. It was cold, calculated performance. Hulagu needed the young leader to act as his herald, convincing remaining holdouts to lay down arms without costly sieges. Kershaw, perhaps clinging to hope of saving his people, cooperated fully. He sent messengers bearing his personal seal with clear commands. Surrender to the Mongols or face Tun's fate. For many, Seeing their imam's seal was the final blow to their resolve. Fortresses that had stood for generations opened their gates. But beneath this veneer of diplomacy, the Mongol war machine was preparing for the next phase. While Korsha feasted in Mongol tents, Hulagu's officials meticulously catalogued every member of assassin leadership, ensuring they knew exactly who to target once the imam's usefulness expired. By spring 1257, the strategic landscape had shifted. Most assassin fortresses had been neutralized, and Hulagu's eyes were turning toward a much larger prize: the city of Baghdad and the Abbasid Caliphate. The assassin state was no longer a threat. It was a ghost. Korsha, sensing the atmosphere change, made a fatal mistake. He asked permission to travel to Karakoram to plead his case directly to Mengi Khan Hulagu. Eager to rid himself of the burden, agreed. He sent the young imam on a long journey across the steppes, accompanied by a Mongol escort that was actually a death squad waiting for a signal. Korsha traveled thousands of miles, believing he was heading toward a diplomatic solution securing his family's future. He didn't know Hulagu had already sent a secret message ahead. The work in Persia is done, and the instrument of its destruction is no longer required. When Korsha reached Karakorom's outskirts in summer 1257, expecting an audience with the great Khan, the gates didn't open in welcome. Minye Khan refused to see him, sending a messenger with cold, final rejection. Since you have already surrendered and dismantled your fortresses, why have you come here? Go back to your own lands. This was the Mongol way of declaring a tool had outlived its use. The journey back toward Persia began under a heavy cloud of silence. Korsha's Mongol escort, once presented as a guard of honor, now felt like a funeral procession. In the middle of Mongolian wilderness, far from witnesses or his mountain home's peaks, the order arrived from the great Khan. The Mongols had a specific tradition for dealing with royal blood. They avoided spilling it on earth to prevent souls from haunting the soil. They threw the last leader of the assassins to the ground and kicked him to death, his ribs shattering under heavy iron-shod boots. His body was left in the dirt, a nameless heap in a vast, indifferent landscape. While Korsha's life ended in Mongolian dust, far more systematic horror was unfolding back in the Elborz Mountains. Hulagu Khan had spent months of Korsha's absence preparing the final solution for the assassin state. He issued a decree targeting every man, woman, and child associated with the order's leadership. This wasn't the heat of battle. It was cold administrative harvest. Mongol patrols moved through conquered territories with lists of names provided by intelligence officers. They gathered surviving garrisons of surrendered fortresses men who had laid down swords on promises of mercy and marched them into valleys. There the Mongols systematically beheaded them. The liquidation scale was designed to ensure the assassins could never regroup. Mongol soldiers were ordered to find every male descendant of the line. They moved through villages like a scythe through wheat. Juvani, an eyewitness, recorded the chilling efficiency. He described how thousands of Ismailis were rounded up and executed in batches, heads piled into grim pyramids that had become a hallmark of Mongol conquest. Even infants weren't spared. The Mongols sought to cut the root so the tree could never grow again. The smell of smoke over the Elborz Mountains in 1256 didn't just signal burning timber and flesh. It carried the scent of charred parchment and ancient ink. While Mongol soldiers stripped gold from Alamate's walls, one man moved through chaos with a different purpose. Automalik Juvani, a brilliant Persian historian and high-ranking official in Hulagu's court, he headed straight for Alamate's legendary library. For over a century, this room had served as the intellectual nerve center of the assassin state, housing thousands of volumes on astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and secret theological doctrines. Hulagu had given Juvani permission to enter and select any books he deemed valuable before the rest were fed to flames. Juvane acted as curator of doom. He moved through stacks with the calculated eye of a man serving conquerors, but respecting the conquered's knowledge. He pulled down works on celestial movements and mathematical proofs, recognizing their universal worth to Mongol administration. He saved historical chronicles and geographical surveys that would help the empire map new territories. But when his hands touched theological texts, the core beliefs and secret rituals that fueled the Fidias' fanatical devotion, his expression hardened. Juvaini was a devout Sunni Muslim, and to him the Ismaili faith was a dangerous heresy that had poisoned the region too long. He intentionally left the order's most sacred texts on shelves, condemning the assassin's internal spiritual history to an ash heap. The fire that followed was a cultural extinction event. Once Juvaini exited with his small pile of acceptable knowledge, Mongol torches were tossed into rooms. Dry mountain-cured paper caught instantly. Eyewitnesses described the sky over the valley turning gray with the remains of 160 years of thought. This was deliberate erasure from the record of time. Hulagu didn't just want the assassins dead. He wanted them forgotten. By burning the library, the Mongols ensured the world would never hear the assassin's story in their own words. The smoke eventually cleared from the Elborz valleys, leaving behind silence that lasted for centuries. To any traveler passing through, in the late 13th century, Hulagu Khan's work appeared absolute. Mountaintops that had once held the world in a grip of terror were now jagged teeth of broken stone, indistinguishable from natural cliffs. Yet, as the Mongol Empire itself began to fracture and fade, a strange phenomenon occurred. The shadow didn't vanish, it simply changed shape. Survival for the Ismailis meant embracing total invisibility. Those who escaped fled to remote corners of the world, the high Pamir Mountains, bustling markets of India, hidden valleys of Syria. They abandoned high walls and poisoned daggers, adopting the practice of taqiyya, strategic concealment. They lived as quiet merchants, humble farmers, and devout scholars, hiding true identity beneath everyday life's surface. This was different warfare, based on patience rather than provocation. While Mongols relied on visible strength of armies, the Ismailis relied on invisible strength of community. The Mongol Empire, for all its terrifying power, was a structure built on conquest and tribute. When the line of great Khans weakened, and horsemen retreated to the steppes, their administrative grip on Persia dissolved. But the Ismaili faith, stripped of fortresses and assassins, proved far more durable than Alamut stones. Over centuries, this group evolved from a militant shadow state into a global, peaceful community. Today, the spiritual successor to the Old Man of the Mountain is the Aga Khan, a figure known not for secret killings, but for massive philanthropic efforts, architectural restoration, and international development. The transition from the world's most feared secret society to one of the world's most respected charitable organizations remains one of history's most remarkable survival stories. There's profound irony in the final reckoning between these two powers. The Mongols sought to preserve their legacy through force and erasure of enemies. Yet today, the Mongol Empire exists only in history books and ruins. The Ismailis, the very people the Mongols tried to wipe from Earth's face, are still here. They survived not by holding onto their walls, but by letting them go. They realized that a fortress made of stone can be pulverized by a trebuchet, but a fortress made of identity is nearly impossible to breach. The story of the Mongols versus the Order of Assassins serves as a timeless study in the nature of power. It shows us that while a superpower can win every battle and destroy every building, it cannot always kill an idea. The eagle's nest fell, the library burned, and the daggers were broken. But the spirit of the people who inhabited those spaces found a way to endure through the darkness. The past is never truly dead. It's just waiting for someone to find the keys.